It's 4 in the afternoon on Friday, September 26th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. We begin with politics this afternoon. A much-anticipated plenary session was held less than an hour ago, but without opposition party members and for a very short while, too. Now, for the latest, we now turn to our National Assembly correspondent Ji Myung-kil, standing by for us on the line. So, Myung-kil, let's start with why the Speaker delayed today's full session.
Yes, Hyun-kyung, Assembly Speaker Chung Ui-hwa did convene the plenary session this afternoon, but he was the only one who spoke. Chung started off by saying that it has been more than 100 days since he became the Assembly Speaker, and said it was heartbreaking to say that just half of all lawmakers have filled the plenary floor, adding that he couldn't remember many times in his 18 years in Parliament when the National Assembly passed bills without the opposition in attendance. He said he would adjourn the plenary session to September 30th. He promised that all lawmakers from both rival parties would attend. Some ruling party lawmakers conveyed their discontent right after the Assembly Speaker made the announcement.
So, Myung-kil, there were attempts in the morning from both rival parties to reach a compromise on opening or delaying the plenary session and rescheduling the session as well.
Yes, Hyun-kyung, the floor leaders from both rival parties met twice this morning, but they were not able to narrow their differences over rescheduling the parliamentary sessions. Ruling Center Party floor leader Lee Won-gu expressed discontent over comments made by the interim chief of the main opposition party, who said that the ruling party leaders were avoiding contact with the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy. Meanwhile, the floor leader of the main opposition party, Park Young-sun, went to the ruling party floor leader's office and asked that Friday's session be delayed. She also said that the ruling party needed to give the opposition party some time to coordinate with the families of victims from April's ferry tragedy over how to proceed with the upcoming parliamentary sessions.
Now, Myung-kil, and just after the plenary session was adjourned, it seemed like the floor leader of the ruling party was a bit caught off guard by the Assembly Speaker's decision to postpone today's plenary session. And we are just getting reports that floor leader Lee Won-gu, as a matter of fact, has decided to step down. He expressed his will or intention to step down.
Yes, that's right, Hyun-kyung. The Saenuri Party's floor leader Lee Won-gu sent text messages to nearly 158 ruling party lawmakers last night, urging their attendance at today's plenary floor. Right after the adjournment of the session, he said he would further discuss matters when the next ruling party's general meeting is convened, but did not specify a date. And I will be back with more updates as they come available. This has been Ji Myung-kil at the National Assembly.
All right, thank you very much, Myung-kil there. Now, in other news, President Park Geun-hye is back in Seoul this Friday after a week-long overseas trip. Our Kwon So-ah has a wrap-up of her state visit to Canada, as well as her message to world leaders at the United Nations.
President Park Geun-hye began her high-profile visits to Canada and New York, seeking understanding from the international community for her policies. And the presidential office of Cheongwade says she was successful in doing that. In her debut at the UN General Assembly in New York, President Park sought international support for her North Korea and unification policies. She also highlighted the gravity of North Korea's human rights abuses. At high-level meetings over global issues, including climate change, terrorism, and education, President Park promoted Korea's contributions as a major middle power and vowed to expand its role even more. Prior to her trip to New York, President Park made a state visit to Canada, where the biggest achievement was elevating bilateral ties to a strategic partnership through the signing of a bilateral free trade pact. It is Canada's first such agreement with a nation in the Asia-Pacific. The president's overseas schedule was packed, but there's just as much to do back in Seoul. The National Assembly remains deadlocked over a special law meant to investigate April's Seoul ferry disaster, and a number of bills intended to jumpstart the economy remain pending as well. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
Meanwhile, foreign ministers of Korea and Japan held talks in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. The question on many people's minds is, will President Park Geun-hye and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe hold a one-on-one soon? Hwang Sung-hee has more.
Meeting for the second time in less than 2 months on Thursday, Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se and his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida agreed to work on repairing their strained ties. Yoon stressed Japan's sincere efforts to heal the wounds of the so-called comfort women is essential. He expressed concerns over Tokyo's recent backpedaling on its past apologies to the Korean women who suffered at the hands of the Japanese army. Kishida reaffirmed Japan has no plans to revise the Kono Statement, a landmark apology to the comfort women that was issued in 1993. The meeting came just days after Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe sent a personal letter to President Park Geun-hye, officially expressing his wish for a summit later this fall. The two diplomats are thought to have discussed the details of a possible summit in November on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Beijing. That would be the first bilateral meeting between the two leaders, as President Park has refused to meet with Abe before he apologizes for Japan's wartime atrocities. But before any summit can take place, analysts say Japan must show it's serious.
To make an apology, you need to give it once with sincerity. And I think that the Korean people have come to doubt the expressions of remorse and regret from Japan because of other statements that have been made.
And on the part of Korea, experts say Seoul must be ready to accept an apology from Japan when the time comes. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
The U.S. Special Representative for North Korea policy begins a week-long trip to Asia this weekend. Glyn Davies will start off in China and then arrive in Seoul on Tuesday for talks with his South Korean counterpart Hwang Jun-guk before finishing up in Japan. U.S. diplomatic sources say the visits are part of routine consultations among member nations of the six-party talks aimed at stopping North Korea's nuclear development. Davies will be accompanied on the trip by Sidney Seiler, the newly appointed U.S. Special Envoy for the six-party nuclear talks. Now, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un not appearing at the regime's second Supreme People's Assembly meeting of this year yesterday is generating wild rumors about his health. The last time he was seen was some 3 weeks ago. Shin Se-min reports.
It was a no-show for the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at the 13th Supreme People's Assembly held on Thursday, and the absence is fueling speculations about his health. The young leader Kim, who has not been seen in public since September 3rd, missed a meeting for the first time since he took power in 2011. Several weeks of absence has stirred up questions about Kim's possible health problems, as he has been seen walking with a limp in recent news reports released by the state media. North Korea, however, replaced its Vice Chairman Choi Ryong-hae of the National Defense Commission to Hwang Byung-seo, the director of the all-powerful General Political Bureau of Pyongyang's Korean People's Army. Choi, once a key confidant of North Korean leader, succeeding Kim's uncle Chang Song-taek, has been dismissed from his seat. The day-long meeting has brought together some 650 delegates to approve some of the key public policy and legal measures, along with overhauling the country's mandatory schooling and conscription systems. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
British Prime Minister David Cameron awaits the British Parliament's approval for joining the U.S.-led coalition against Islamic State militants. Now this, as U.S. authorities say they have identified the masked IS militant who beheaded 2 American journalists and a British aid worker. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The U.S.-led coalition fighting Islamic State militants in Iraq and Syria is making some progress. During a briefing with reporters in Washington, FBI Director James Comey said that the U.S. has determined the identity of the militant who beheaded 2 American journalists and a British aid worker in Syria, but he would not be drawn on releasing his name to the media just yet. The videotaped beheadings of Americans James Foley and Steven Sotloff were major factors in U.S. President Barack Obama's decision to strike IS militarily, with the group's main strongholds in Syria the main targets of U.S. airstrikes this week. The Pentagon on Thursday released a video of its airstrikes against the maiden module refinery, a target that's under IS control in eastern Syria. Attacks on oil refineries are intended to undermine the group's ability to finance itself from oil sales. The U.S.-led coalition to fight the extremist group is gaining momentum, as Britain announced on Thursday that it would join. Prime Minister David Cameron is waiting for Parliament to grant its official approval. Other Western allies of the U.S., including France, Australia, Belgium, and the Netherlands, have agreed to join the airstrikes in Iraq. But despite these developments, the Pentagon says it's too early to say whether the U.S.-led coalition is winning against the IS. A spokesperson pointed to Islamic State's continued access to financing, volunteers, and weapons, even after the aerial bombing campaign against them began last month. Kim Jeon, ARIRANG News.
The World Health Organization says the number of confirmed Ebola deaths in West Africa is fast approaching 3,000. Now, with that, a high-level meeting on the Ebola outbreak took place at the UN headquarters in New York. U.S. President Barack Obama said the world's response to the outbreak was too slow and too little. UN Chief Ban Ki-moon said a 20-fold boost in aid was needed, as World Bank President Ji Myung-kil said his group would nearly double its financial commitment to $400 million to get urgently needed staff and resources to the affected areas. Now, all of that as one of the hardest hit West African states, Sierra Leone, seals off another district in a desperate move to contain the epidemic, placing some 1/3 of its populace under quarantine. A picture speaks 1,000 words, and that was the case of the satellite images taken by India's maiden Mars mission, released by the country's space agency on Thursday. It shows giant craters carved into a golden surface. Scientists tweeted, "The view is nice up here," under the Twitter handle @MarsOrbiter, which has amassed more than 108,000 followers since its setup on Tuesday. The satellite, affectionately called MOM by the mission's acronym, will spend 6 months in elliptical orbit, collecting atmospheric data from as close as 365 kilometers and as far out as 80,000 kilometers from the planet's surface. Korea and China are still divided over a number of sensitive issues in their bilateral free trade agreement talks. Now, the two hope to wrap up negotiations by the end of this year, but is that a feasible plan? Our Kim Min-ji has the details of the 13th round of FTA negotiations between Korea and China.
The latest round of talks on a Korea-China free trade agreement came to an end Friday, and while some progress was made, the two sides remain divided over some highly sensitive issues. In the 13th round of negotiations held in Beijing, the two sides discussed a range of topics from products to services and investment. There were compromises made with customs issues, such as exempting shipments of less than $700 from submitting a certificate of origin. They also agreed to complete customs procedures on shipments within 48 hours of arrival. But differences do remain. Korea wants China to lift tariffs on Korean manufacturing products in the early stages of implementation, and China wants the Korean market open for agricultural products. Neither side has been willing to budge on those issues. The two countries have now so far agreed on 4 of 22 chapters for their FTA and are nearing compromises in several other chapters, including economic cooperation. Korea's trade ministry said the two sides have yet to decide on a date for their next round of talks. President Park Geun-hye and Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed in talks earlier this summer to wrap up FTA talks by the end of this year. China is Korea's biggest trading partner in terms of both imports and exports. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Korea's consumer sentiment remained flat in September. The Bank of Korea says the country's consumer sentiment index stood at 107 in September, unchanged from the previous month. The figure remains below the 108 level recorded just before the Seoul ferry sinking back in April. And with that, some experts are questioning the effects and even the validity of the government's stimulus measures. The monthly index reflects the overall economic outlook of consumers, their living conditions, and future spending plans. Now, a reading above 100 means optimists outnumber pessimists. Now, strikes over pay at Hyundai Motor and its sister company Kia Motors have become a regular occurrence in recent years. This year alone, Hyundai has recorded losses of over $1 billion due to work stoppages, and the company is now dealing with another. Hwang Ji-hye tells us more.
Another round of strikes over contentious wage talks began earlier this week following Hyundai Motor Group's $10 billion purchase of land in Seoul. That follows a similar partial walkout at the conglomerate last month that cost Hyundai Motor and affiliate Kia Motors more than $1 billion. Over the past few years, strikes over pay negotiations have hit the automakers' factories at home, even though their wages are among the highest in the automotive industry. But local Hyundai factories have the worst productivity compared to those abroad. While it takes around 30 hours to produce one automobile in Korea, a factory in the U.S. can do the same job in less than 15 hours. Experts say although strikes are means to improve work conditions, those that go on for a prolonged period of time could hurt the company's overall competitiveness. They add that strikes could lead to fewer employment opportunities in the domestic economy, as the automaker might move factories overseas to cut down on costs. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Hundreds of experts on human resource development from across the globe have gathered in Korea to share their thoughts on the role of civil servants in public service. Guests at the 2014 Global Public HRD Conference include 170 civil servants from 65 nations, including the U.S., China, Japan, Russia, and Germany. Now, throughout the one-day event, those in attendance have been examining and sharing ideas about the public services they offer, with an aim of enhancing the accountability, ethics, and expertise of civil servants in and outside of Korea. Well, it's time to check out the latest on Asia's biggest sporting event, the 17th Asian Games currently taking place in Incheon. And for that, we turn to Arirang's Song Ji-sun at the News Center. So, Ji-sun, the talk of the town of late is Korea's women's archery, isn't it?
Right, Hyun-kyung, just after setting a new world record in the compound event on Thursday, the female archers are after the gold in team recurve event. Now, the South Korean women's recurve archery team moved on to the team final after outshooting the Indian opponents 6-0 in the set score at the semifinals. Team Korea's goal of winning a 9th consecutive gold medal in men's event, however, failed as the men's squad lost to China with set score of 4-5 in the semis. The two teams tied until the last shoot-off, but the ticket for the final went to China as they shot closer to the bullseye. The men's squad will go against Japan for the bronze medal, while the women's squad will fight for the gold against China on Sunday.
So that will be one game not to miss. Now let's move on to Korea's legendary gymnast Yang Hak-sun. He has a signature skill named after him, but we didn't see that last night, did we?
That's right, he was going to attempt his signature Yang 1 or the 2, the triple twist and half on the vault, but he downgraded during his first attempt, later saying he knew he did not have enough momentum to complete the twists. On his second attempt, he landed a move called the Lopez, an easier skill with a round-off takeoff, and that was enough to earn him silver with a 15.2 points. Yang is suffering from a thigh injury but competed at this year's Asian Games to win medals with his teammates in the group events. Hong Kong's Shik Wai-hoon took the gold with 15.216 points. Meanwhile, North Korea's Lee Se-kwang, who was seen as Yang's competition, he missed out the podium as he lost balance upon landing his first attempt and fell face first onto the mat to finish 4th. And to another Olympian who hasn't earned a gold at this year's Asian Games just yet. Korea's Marine boy Park Tae-won had the closest shot to winning a gold in the 100-meter freestyle after having qualified the first, but missed out on the podium or the top in the final. Now this time he came in second after China's Ningze Tao, who beat his own Asian record, clocking 47.7 seconds in this event. Despite having responded second fastest to the starting gun, Park was back in 4th at the midway point and had to push really hard to catch up with Ning and overtake bronze medal winner Shinri Shota of Japan. Park's record, a second behind Ning, wasn't as fast as season best, and although he said he couldn't be satisfied with his performance, he congratulated on winner Ning on breaking the 47-second barrier as an Asian swimmer.
Now, 1/5 of the nation apparently tuned in to cheer for him, but to be a little disappointed, if I may add. But you say he's got another chance tonight coming up.
Right, it is the last day of competition for some sports like swimming, and Park Tae-won is looking to grab maybe 2 more medals on this Friday night in the 50-meter 100 freestyle and 4x100-meter medley relay. If he had just 1 more medal, that means he will be the new record holder for the most medals won in the Asian Games for a Korean athlete. We also have the men's round of 16 in football and women's quarterfinals, in which Team Korea will play against Chinese Taipei, kicking off at 8 p.m. And for those of you wanting to catch these games on the scene, tickets are still available for many of these events, so you should also try visiting Incheon if you can make it. And moving on to some medal standings, Korea on Thursday has let Japan take 2nd place in overall medal counts, and the two have been switching places between the 2nd and 3rd place over the past 24 hours. Here where the top 10 stand as of this afternoon.
Good afternoon, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. We've been having a typical autumn today with fresh air and fine dust level at the near 0 level right now. And due to the high pressure front, we are seeing some cloudy skies nationwide, which should be clearing up in the evening. Now today we can expect similar conditions as yesterday, with temperatures ranging in the low to high 20s depending on where you are. However, always remember that our temperature drops about 10 degrees in the evenings. Now, as for the weather conditions in Incheon, where the Asian Games are being held, the daytime got up to 25 degrees, which is slightly lower than yesterday with cloudy skies. Now going over to our temperature readings, Seoul will peak at 27 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will peak at 27 and 25 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island peaks up to 27, while Dokdo hits 21, while Mangkeungang is slightly higher at 22 degrees. Well, that's all for Korea. Now here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
that brings us to the end of our newscast. We'll have more updates coming up in about 90 minutes time at 6 p.m. Korea time. Thank you for watching.